Hello, and welcome, one and all, to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. Is it good to be back, Phil? I was going to say it's good to be back without even thinking. I think it's good to be back.
It's good to be back.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting stuff that's happened. One of the benefits of taking like a week off, even during UFC time, means that there's stuff that's happened and stuff that's going to happen, and there's been UFC and boxing. You know, the like sheer tide of combat sports that comes across the world means that just taking a week off means that like when you jump back in, there's immediately like a lot of interesting things.
That is true.
Happened.
That's true. It's kind of fun to step away from the schedule for that reason. You just get to dive right back in, and suddenly it feels like everything takes on a hue of greater importance. Speaking of boxing, by the way, I may as well mention now, before we get into our subject for today's episode, that I did finally publish a commentary of Canelo versus Bivol on the Patreon. So if you haven't seen that one already, that was, I believe, the third piece of bonus content for last month, and you should go check it out. It was my first time viewing it. Somehow I went like 3 weeks without even seeing that fight. And then I watched it and I commented on it, and it's fascinating. So I encourage you to go check that out. And to do that, you will have to support our Patreon, which we deserve, you know, frankly.
Yeah.
What are we talking about today? UFC 270. What's the number?
I'm not even going to hazard a guess.
Phil.
It's in the 270s.
For fuck's sake. What's the number? UFC.
It's Proch Teixeira.
Yeah. Is it 274?
Got to be higher than that, right?
275.
Is it? Wow.
Yeah.
Jumping back in like a well-oiled machine. Yes, it is.
It's 275. More importantly, it's got at least one title fight in Glover Teixeira versus Yuri Prochazka. If you listened to our other, our bonus Heavy Hands, I think our bonus episode last month on the Patreon, I think is where this heavy bag ended up, where, a listener and patron very respectfully critiqued me for my treatment of Valentina Shevchenko. Then you're going to get an opportunity to get really mad, because I don't give a shit about this fight. The co-main event, Valentina Shevchenko versus Taila Santos. The crowd goes wild. All the people who, for some reason, didn't boo Holly Holm are not booing this fight even more loudly. And then, much more importantly, we have a rematch between Zhang Weili and Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the let's be real, the real co-main event slot. It's a rematch of a title fight.
I mean, this is, let's be honest, it's a 3-round fight, but it's for the championship.
It's for the championship. And also, it should be a 5-round fight. Let's be real. Like, I'm happy to have it on this card, but this is either an argument for occasionally just having 5-rounder non-title fights on cards, which we've done once before. Like, how the fuck is this not a BMF belt fight? You know, Make up a fake belt for this so we can get 5 rounds, because it was one of the greatest fights of all time in their first meeting. Or it's an argument for make that should be the headliner of a fight night card, and it'll be one of the best headliners I've seen in a long time. Frankly,
so it's there's one of the few arguments, like valid arguments, for an interim belt, and normally the UFC loves them.
True.
Because like it's the interim belt between Kai Kara France and Brandon Moreno, and it's like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
No.
Interim belt here for sure.
But this should be an interim belt because Esparza Namunas 2 was just that bad.
Frankly, you could put Zhang Weili, Joanna Jędrzejczyk as a non-title main event of a pay-per-view, and I would still be like, yeah, that's a good main event, because the first fight, again, was one of the best fights I've ever seen. So it's a very solid looking pay-per-view, despite the fact that the co-main event is sort of a non-factor. We're still going to talk about it. All right. So, gender critical fan who thinks that I'm too rude to Valentina Shevchenko because she's a woman, you're going to get a chance to hear me talk shit about her and talk very excitedly about two women who are actually fun to watch fight on the same episode. So I hope that causes some unpleasant cognitive dissonance for you. We've also got on this card, and these could possibly end up late in the show. It depends if we do or don't spend a full half hour talking about Valentina. We've got Rogerio Bontorin versus Manel Kape, a flyweight fight on the main card. We've got Jack Della Maddalena, who had a fantastic UFC debut, making his return in a curious booking versus Ramazan Imaev, which could be really, really dull if things don't go Maddalena's way. I like Kyung Ho. I don't know. I'm reading all these things in Wikipedia order. I'm used to calling him Kyung Ho Kong. He's fighting Dana Batjarel on the prelims. That's a cool fight. Really like both those guys. It's a solid pay-per-view card. Very good main event. That might be sad. Title fight, technically, in the co-main that might be very dull, or could be very exciting and short, hopefully. And then rematch of the greatest women's fight ever. So, Teixeira Prochazka, our main event for the light heavyweight title. We knew it would come to this, right, Phil?
Yeah.
You get your...
Prochazka has been the coming man for a while.
Yeah. And we knew we would get to enjoy just the wonderful catharsis of seeing Glover Teixeira at 58 years old finally win the UFC title, only to then have to fight like a murderer.
Yeah.
A murderer still in the prime of his life. And it's come to this. The old man has to fight an incredibly violent younger fighter. Go on.
Yeah, this is one of those times when, like, Mackenzie matchmaking and, competitive merit for some weird reason actually line up.
Mm.
And it's also one of those fights where I think you're almost sort of conscious. I think from my perspective anyway, I think I'm going to at least consciously partially turn off my technical analysis part of the brain for it.
Mm. Why is that?
Because in these kind of fights, you can really often get caught up in how in the stylistic issues of both the fighters and the ways that the old rugged veteran could potentially get to the young, insanely violent challenger. You can get yourself more and more excited when you start thinking man, Prochazka's super hittable, and Teixeira has actually become a really decent boxer.
Yeah.
And you just cannot get away with just static head movement against him, as Anthony Smith found out. If you just try and run a game which is just based upon intercepting him with strikes, that's not going to work the whole time against Glover Teixeira, because he actually he can slip punches and he can come behind them and he can work in combination and all this other kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you can look at it and you could say things like, you could look at how Prochazka has struggled with wrestling in the past, how he got taken down by Dominic Reyes, and all this other kind of stuff. You can build a case for the older fighter. The thing is that almost all the time when these kind of fights actually happen, they're just hideous slaughters. They're just the kind of fights that make you think, why the fuck did I think the old guy was going to do anything apart from get torched?
What are some parallels that come to your mind when you say that?
No, the first. I mean, this is a really unfair one. The first one that really springs to mind is was Mike Brown, Jose Aldo. Which was the one where, Mike Brown wasn't that old, but it was one of these ones where, people were like, well, he's never really fought a wrestler on the level of Mike Brown. What if he just, gets put in the clinch and he just saw the fight? He's like, my God.
Yeah.
But also, Hua versus Jones.
Yeah.
Look at the way Jones stands and fights. Just low kicks into punches. Hua is durable enough to be able to withstand all the stuff that Jones throws out. Has Jones faded a bit against what's his face, against Stephan Bonner? And then the fight itself is just one of the most comprehensive ass whoopings of all time.
Yeah.
And this is one of those ones where, like, Teixeira has been getting hurt quickly in almost every fight he's had, apart from... Actually, no, he was hurt by Blachowicz as well. Mm-hmm. He's basically been getting hurt badly in virtually every fight he's had recently.
Yeah, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, it's mostly a bad thing. He's not been finished in any of those fights. Like, you have essentially, you've thrust me into the role of, like, I have to,
defender.
Of what?
Old man defender.
Old man defender, yeah. Like, I have to pretend that there are, like, rules. There's a sort of, like, I don't know, some sort of ethical code to how fights play out, that it should be, like, fair. And in fairness, he's just incredibly fucking tough. And I think a major difference between those, what was the first fight you named? There was Shogun Jones. What was the other one? Oh, Brown Aldo. Yeah. I mean, I guess if the parallel there is the wrestling, I'm not sure how well that one fits, to be honest, because Mike Brown, like, I think he just had horrendous timing. I think Mike Brown was a very good fighter, and then, like, right at the end of his prime, he got a title, and then he just had to fight the best featherweight ever. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was necessarily just him, like, getting old. Like, the wrestling was not going to work against Jose Aldo. It might work against...
It was one of those ones where, like, there were valid reasons to think. Like,
yeah, I get it from that perspective.
Although never fought anyone like this. And that, like...
Yeah.
No, he'd never fought a strong physical wrestler. And as it turned out, that was, that was basically the kind of people Jose Aldo was absolutely designed to beat.
Yeah.
He was the opposite of someone who'd come up to the title, it was the opposite of, like, they get to the title and it's a bad style match. It was like he got to the title and it was like, oh, these are the best style matchups for me.
Yeah. But I think the best thing about this for Prochazka is just the fact that Teixeira is old. Otherwise, as a style matchup, I do think there are elements of Teixeira's game that he really is not super comfortable facing. Like, the wrestling might really work here.
Mm-hmm.
Prochazka is a mess. He got pretty substantially out-wrestled by King Mo. I mean, he also, let's not forget, didn't he get knocked out by King Mo once?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, he got knocked out. It was a standing. It was, did Mo knock him down into, like, ground strikes?
No, he beat him up on the ground, and then Prochazka went insane, reckless pressure, and ran into a counter right hand. He just walked face first into a right hand off the back foot. And it was a single one-shot knockout. So the thing is that Prochazka is so much relying on his ability to psychologically break opponents that I do wonder, is it really a bad thing that Teixeira keeps getting hurt and is just seemingly impossible to actually finish? Or is that in fact a strength against a guy like Prochazka who thinks that the only thing to do when you hurt somebody is to get even crazier and care less and less and less about your own safety? Against a guy who has, a major reason that Teixeira has not been finished in so many of these fights is that he is maybe the best wrestler in the division. And a tremendous scrambler as well. Like, we're not just talking about takedown ability, although we've known forever that Teixeira has a great single leg takedown game. But even just any position where you knock him down and collapse on top of him and he can get to a leg, has a tremendous ability to create scrambles and somehow wind up on top.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also just a hardwired counterpuncher. So if you come storming in recklessly after hurting him, there's gonna be an overhand right coming at your chin. There's gonna be a left hook. You might run into a jab. You might run into an uppercut. I agree with you that Teixeira, against all my expectations, has really, like, turned a new corner as a boxer in these last few years. Where I really thought, I thought he had a good, if very rudimentary boxing game when he came to the UFC. And then he fought Jones, and then it sort of seemed to kind of get worse for a while. And now he's in like this late career Jacare stage where everything's kind of clicking. There's a little more variety and feel to his strikes. He puts them together better. And it's not just the overhand right and the left hook, which used to be kind of the whole story. So I don't know. I mean, again, you've put me in this role. I have to accept the mantle of old man defender. But it now convinced me. What is Prochazka going to do that's so very different from all the other guys who have hurt Teixeira that have been unable to finish him and lost as a result of that?
He's going to be a young, insanely violent finisher.
Yeah.
I think. Okay, I thought another example of one of these things. Anthony Smith against Shogun Rua. I think we both picked Shogun for that one, right? And yeah, there's obvious reasons why you can assemble a game plan and a victory condition for Shogun against Anthony Smith.
Yeah.
Because, Anthony Smith is himself a pretty poor defensive wrestler.
Yeah.
He's, vulnerable to just getting worn down in the clinch. Should Shogun be able to low kick him, he's very front foot heavy. And in general, Shogun had been a crafty counterpuncher and Shogun in weird ways towards the end of his career has functioned like a lesser version of Teixeira.
Mm-hmm.
He's much of his gameplay, his game plan functions along the same lines. He's essentially a counterpuncher and clinch wrestler. He just doesn't have things. He doesn't have the depth of Teixeira's takedowns, or he's mostly a body lock guy. He doesn't have Teixeira's single leg or his multiple ways of getting to it. He doesn't have quite the top game. He's essentially just a worse version of Teixeira at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But there were lots of reasons to assume that he could get to Anthony Smith, and the actual fight happened, and he just got torched, and you were like, oh, that's what it looks like. Oh yeah. And that's the thing, is that I cannot stop myself from thinking that's just one of these fights. That no matter how much, because you can. That's the thing, is that Prochazka is defensively vulnerable everywhere. You can hit him on the feet. You can take him down.
He can sit in his guard and beat him up.
Reyes did both of those things to him. Volkan Oezdemir was having tremendous success against him. He is the absolute definition of all offense, no defense. In the modern UFC, more so than Charles Oliveira.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that if his offense starts working on Glover Teixeira, I think he's just going to pour it on until fight's over. I cannot get the image of this for this fight of just Prochazka just land. Because the other thing is that he's super accurate. Teixeira generally takes some time to get his own head movement working. For example, the way that Thiago Santos picked him off early, was just hurting him repeatedly at the beginning of that fight, and in some ways late as well. I just can't stop thinking that, if that happens, Prochazka is just gonna keep battering him until there's an early sad knockout. The other thing is that Prochazka has had a very long time to prepare for this very specific style matchup.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he's just going to be youthful and explosive and focused on getting out of takedowns as quickly as humanly possible. Admittedly, Teixeira has only typically struggled with wrestlers who are with counter wrestling from people who are actually genuinely good wrestlers themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think the margins of error are so small that if Prochazka gets out of one or two takedowns, he's just going to be lighting up too much too early. And also just the fact that, like, we've talked before about how people struggle with being champions. And I think that's the kind of change that you can make, when you're younger, or at least in your prime. Don't know how, like, the mentality of an older fighter who gets to the belt like that works.
It could be. It could also be. Teixeira strikes me as a Charles Oliveira type.
Yeah, I mean, he does strike me as...
I think he'll have a perpetual underdog mentality even as a champion. I mean, that's also not even that uncommon in fighters. There's lots of champions who get the belt and they just go their entire career being favored over everyone, thinking of themselves as the underdog.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, it's just a good mentality to have.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's just the thing, is that I think that Prochaska is just, he's young, he is improving, mostly in that his offense simply becomes more refined over time. That he's just charging people less and is just staying over his feet and picking them off more, but he's not really getting that much better defensively. But I think he will be ready to scramble out of takedowns, and I think I just think he's going to be too dialed in. I think it's just going to look like I cannot stop myself from thinking it's just going to look like an ugly slaughter. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I'm curious about is obviously the directionality of this fight, because all the things, I think the things that, Prochaska is the most vulnerable doing are, when he's coming forward. It's also when he's at his most dangerous, which is why this sort of flip side thing of like, okay, you come forward, you're probably going to hurt Teixeira. Does that put you in trouble? Teixeira is also undeniably at his best going forward. And I almost have this sneaking suspicion that Teixeira is going to get to come forward more early. But then I wonder, does that work for Prochaska? As a guy with probably a better gas tank, who, I mean, if you look at Prochaska's fights, if I'm going to use the King Mo series as an example, he has a very different approach to the second fight when he pretty soundly beats King Mo. He does not just dash forward and get taken down. He does not, after that, get back to his feet and dash forward twice as aggressively and get knocked out. He comes forward in bursts, and then much of the fight he's actually either like sort of trying to fight in neutral exchanges or off the back foot, like making King Mo chase him. And I can go two ways with that. Like, on the one hand, maybe that's a terrible idea against Teixeira, is just giving him the front foot and trying to stay away. On the other hand, maybe not. He's kind of old and slow, and that allows you to get an idea for what he's putting out there, get a feel for his timing, before you actually commit yourself to too many reckless blitzes. And if it's a kind of fight where Prochaska does make it through a first round and then starts to come on, I can see that being a very different shape of fight to what like Teixeira has gotten accustomed to winning lately. The opponent just sort of lets you show everything that you're working with, because even a better Teixeira is not that deep a fighter on the feet and in his setups to get to the ground. And then Prochaska is just much better defensively if he's not just storming forward. He's better at stopping takedowns. He's better at evading punches. I don't know. I mean, I'm still going to pick Prochaska.
Kind of have to.
Yeah. I mean, I came into this knowing I was going to pick him. Because Teixeira is an old man and Prochaska is insanely violent. But I am very curious to see how he approaches this, because I think if he just goes apeshit going after Teixeira, I think that's the thing that might not work out for him. If he tries to fight him like he did Dominic Reyes, I don't know. Teixeira is not going to respond to that in the same way as Reyes. He's going to fight to stand his ground. And he is going to look to meet you as you come in, not try to like get away from what's happening and then respond. And he's got a phase shift. He's got a variety of ways to meet you coming in. And doing the Reyes fight to Teixeira would essentially be exactly how Prochaska lost his first fight with King Mo. So I think a more measured approach would make a lot of sense for Prochaska here, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's worth, that Reyes fight was a giant war.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that Prochaska is so, as I said, he's just vulnerable everywhere. Like, It's not even like he's this incredible striker and he just needs to stop his, he just needs to protect his hips from Glover, and then he'll beat him up. There's, again, we're talking about potential routes to victory. It's entirely possible that Glover can just stun him.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not knock him out on the feet or anything like that, but Reyes was able to quite badly hurt Prochaska, who's very, his main thing that really makes him work as a fighter is really the fact that he can just take a tremendous punch.
Yeah.
But that being said, so I think, I think he probably should. He probably should take the back foot, at least for the beginning. I mean, as well, because Teixeira takes some time to get really going with his own ability to avoid shots.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best case scenario for Teixeira is really that Blachowicz fight.
Yeah.
He fakes a level change and he just gets an entire round of top control.
Yes.
Because not only does that like take away some of that early explosiveness of Prochaska, but it also might lead him to it might remind him of what that first King Mo fight was like.
Mm-hmm. It either gives you something extra to think about, or more likely, I think if you're Prochaska, your response to that is going to be, oh God, I'm thinking too much. I have to stop thinking and kill. I think that's his go-to response when things aren't going to plan.
Yeah, I think it's just the way it lines up. I think it's just one of those fights where the young guy has made it there at the right time. They've taken their lumps along the way. They're just going to come. He's going to come in absolutely brimming with confidence.
Yeah,
like he's had a ton of time to prepare for the specific style matchup, and I think I cannot stop myself and think it's just going to be like a pretty tough watch.
Brutal, yeah.
I would like to be wrong, though.
I would love to be wrong. My God, I would love nothing more. Nothing more other than to not have to talk about this next fight. Let's take a break. When we come back, Valentina Shevchenko versus Tyler Santos. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Now, who is Tyler Santos?
This is a damn good question. I know I've seen all her fights.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. It's that time again, folks. Christmas. When we get to lavish all of our love on Valentina Shevchenko. I just can't stop thinking about that. Again, I have to emphasize this every time I bring it up, Phil. Very eloquent and well-phrased and respectful critique of how I talk about Valentina Shevchenko's fights. How am I supposed to care about this? Is my question pertain in reference to that
you
critique.
Just need to go back to. We just continue making fun of it. No one is expecting this to be anything particularly special. But then again, I guess no one was expecting, apart from Schwan, no one was expecting Nunez Pena to be anything.
Oh God, I should have read Schwan's breakdown of this. Find out how Tyler Santos is finally going to be the woman to defeat Valentina.
But yeah, so I think you should let the critique of us being mean to Shevchenko probably go out of your head, because there's the risk of becoming like that. There's that comic of the guy thinking about like all the nice things that people have said to him as you know, they're all in like these speech bubbles, and then there's like everything is like incredibly positive, and there's one person that like says sometimes you can be a bit mean, and then it's just him going about his day, and like all of the other bubbles just fade away.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is him just lying in bed at night with like, sometimes you can be a bit mean, like is the only one remaining.
That's true, because I do get an overwhelming number of responses of people saying like, I wish Valentina Shevchenko was dead. Like that's a very common comment that I get.
Jesus.
I should remember those, is what you're saying. The positive ones.
You should remember the positive ones about people saying, I like the way you break things down, rather than like the one where you're like, sometimes they're too mean to Valentina Shevchenko.
I'm more thinking it's specifically relevant to breaking down Valentina Shevchenko fights, or, as is often the case, not really breaking them down and just sort of complaining about them. Anyway, the problem here is that it's yet another person for Shevchenko to feast on. And the problem with these is always that she gets a feast laid out in front of her and then she nibbles. Daintily nibbles. Mm-hmm. That's the main issue.
All the time.
No, of course not. She will daintily nibble until suddenly eating everything in one bite. Somehow the worst of both worlds. Somehow, even
no, it isn't. I'm very glad that she's
you're right.
finished some fights.
You're right.
I didn't want to see a lot of them go very much longer.
You're right. It has a Rosenstrikey vibe to it sometimes, where it's like, did that make up for how bad this was before the knockout? But at least it spared us from more. I suppose that would be the more glass half full perspective. So what's your take here? Is she going to destroy Taila Santos, or is she going to nibble at her? A lot of it, I think, depends on how the opponent approaches her.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we're in for nibbling. But it is worth noting that Taila Santos is, defensively no great shakes.
No.
As you might expect. But is... So I think this is an interesting example, like way that the Shevchenko dynamic plays out. Is that a lot of the time, and we sort of discussed this around the Andrade and Maya fights, is that like, is it better to be a okay grappler and an enthusiastic striker? I mean, firstly, okay, let's start at first principles. Firstly, to defeat Valentina Shevchenko, you need to be at some kind of physical parity with her.
Yes. She's a beast.
She is, for this division, she is extremely strong. She is extremely fast. If you don't have the physical gifts, it's not going to happen. She's not going to give you a chance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the questions is, historically, is it better to be like a striker with some grappling or a grappler with some striking? And generally, I think it's better to be the second one.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's the idea that like it's a death sentence to be on the feet with Shevchenko is obviously overplayed, but she's beaten very good strikers, and I think the Andrade Maya dynamic is Andrade is not a great technical wrestler, but is actually a quite crafty offensive striker at this point, and she just got absolutely dummied.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Maya is just a super enthusiastic striker, but like not a good one in any way, but is a pretty effective wrestler and grappler, and had a much more competitive fight, although admittedly not one she came anywhere near to winning.
Yeah, but she probably picked up a round.
So at the very least, Taila Santos is moderately physical. She is not Valentina Shevchenko. She is a good, enthusiastic, and determined grappler.
Mm-hmm.
So there is at least the possibility that Shevchenko's primary safety valve, which is the clinch and takedowns, will not be there. Because even in clinch wars with decent wrestlers and grapplers like Robertson and so on, Santos has been able to come out on top pretty consistently.
Mm-hmm.
She's a good clinch grappler. On the other hand, she's She is. I mean, she's not a good striker at all. Really, I don't think. I think she actually reminds me a bit of. Actually, I'm going to caveat that. I think she's okay. She reminds me a bit of Thiago dos Santos. Thiago Santos.
I was like, who the hell is Thiago dos Santos?
Dos Santos. In that he's a pretty loopy puncher, but he's got a good sense for where his opponent's head is.
Yes, I think that's a very strong comparison. Because I was going to say, if you're just trying to grade her on, I mean, obviously I'm a rube when it comes to wrestling and grappling, so I'm much more likely to just be like, oh, they're good, they're not good. Which you can't get a general impression, but you're missing a lot of granular details there. With striking, I'm much less prone to just say someone's good or not good. So if you're trying to weigh her as, oh, she's a good striker, she's not a good striker, I don't know. I would say she does seem to have a feel for striking.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, she can be surprisingly effective. I would also say that she can make good decisions in where she places her strikes. I would say by a pretty good margin, her most recent performance against Joanne Wood was her best striking performance, where you see not only her just general sort of good timing and sense of distance, which reveals itself in a pretty reliable ability to counter Joanne Wood with her right hand. But you also see her mixing it up and throwing to the body. And you see her staying over her feet about 65% of the time, where she'll let a big swing go.
That's a little generous.
55% of the time. She's not constantly falling over. You will see her being able to engage and then pull back behind a guard and reset her feet at a good distance. So there's a feel in her striking that, like, if she had a really good striking coach, she could probably be pretty damn good.
Yeah.
She's got power. She's pretty quick. She's pretty athletic in general. And she can mix up her targets. She doesn't get like too tunnel vision-y without undue provocation, and she can time a counter pretty well. But her mechanics are mostly a mess.
Yeah, I think so. That's the main thing, is that like that striking performance came against Joanne Wood, who is again like a sort of a pretty decent striker for the division, but has some like major problems, like being glacially slow for the division.
Yeah.
So the fact that, and just sort of relying on having a stream of offense and the clinch as a safety valve to as her defense. And
being like a slow starter and too easy to put on the back foot, and basically having many of the worst traits of like Donald Cerrone.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. So like the fact that Santos was stepping in with loopy punches didn't matter so much as the fact that they were just accurate.
Yeah.
And that Wood's head was just there to be hit. I mean, so the problem is obviously that when Santos jumps in like with loopy 1-2s, that Shevchenko isn't even going to counter her. She's just going to back out.
Yeah.
She's going to zip back out of the pocket, and Santos will lose her balance and stop.
Yeah, and Santos's sort of seemingly innate ability as a counterpuncher also relies on the idea that the opponent is going to do lots of things to you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great evil power of Shevchenko's, that like this wouldn't be the first person she's fought who actually has some like knack as a counterpuncher. I mean, God, look at Holly Holm. You know, she fought a much bigger woman who's actually unwittingly at her best as a counterpuncher. But most of these fighters don't really have the patience. No one has Shevchenko's patience. Like, it really is an incredible thing. It makes her unbelievably tedious to watch much of the time. But you cannot shake her from what she wants to do. She's like a robot. Like, she's in there to perform a task. You're not going to go in there and outweight her, you know? It's like fighting Lyoto Machida back in the day, where like Rashad Evans thought he was going to out-counter Lyoto. Like, no. Yeah. You have to be actually very, very good at that. You have to be able to look at a brick wall and convince it to make a move at you. You have to be able to step in and like create a false engagement that provokes the response that is the thing you actually want to counter. You have to be able to think in complex layers and see several layers ahead into an exchange on the feet. And so I just don't think Taila Santos' counterpunching is going to be a factor at all, because she's not going to be getting enough material to time. And being a sort of like more enthusiastic than she is good as a striker, she's not going to have the discipline to wait that out. I don't think it would work for her if she did, but what I'm saying is that given that brick wall, she is going to start taking swings. And exposing herself. And she's much, much worse. You can see this in every one of her fights, including the Joanne Wood one. When the opponent is just giving her space and she's just forced to like eat it up and leap into it with punches, that is by far when she looks her worst on the feet. That's when she falls off balance. That's when she heavily overcommits, which is just when given empty space to jump into. So yeah, I think Shevchenko is going to nullify her to the point of probably like killing herself. And then the question then is what happens, as always, what happens after she's like brought to the brink of killing herself 3 or 4 times? Does she shut down and then the fight is terrible for the rest of the time?
Yeah, is she just like, well, let's get let's compete for as long as we can?
Or is she going to go kamikaze?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. We've never really seen her pushed far enough to know that.
Santos, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you see any place in which Santos can actually make her grappling a problem? Because I do agree. I think she's physical enough that with her super aggressive ground game, she really could make something happen in a way that even like Jennifer Maia couldn't. Maia could like is a pretty capable wrestler and a decent enough like she can hold somebody down, but she's not much as a super aggressive top player. Santos is much meaner on top of somebody, is a much better guard passer, more aggressive with her strikes, and super aggressive hunting for submissions. I mean, the rear naked choke she got on Joanne Wood was like her 5th attempt in 30 seconds, each one playing off the one before it with strikes in between to keep her guessing. So is there any possibility of getting to a kind of fight where Santos might actually be something Shevchenko hasn't really had to handle on the ground before?
I think only if Shevchenko flubs a takedown attempt, because this is the other thing that's really that I'm struggling with a bit. How many times has Santos gotten into aggressive grappling engagements on her own terms in her UFC career? Like, how many times has she forced the clinch or shot the takedown? Because, I mean, she's almost Diaz-esque in the fact that, like, the Gillian Robertson fight is one where, she out-grapples that fight and has top position for like a significant amount of it, and so on and so forth. Like, how many of those takedowns came from her initiating the clinch or going for a takedown? I think literally 0. I think literally those positions came from
Robertson wanting to wrestle.
Actually, like, initiating grappling and having a process to initiate the grappling.
Yeah.
And she really is, like, does look like the classic style of, like, I'm going to beat you up on the feet, and then when my pressure gets to you, you're going to shoot in and I'm going to destroy you with my grappling, which is a terrible thing to be against Valentina Shevchenko, because you're just not going to get past step A. Yeah,
not many. I mean, granted, Robertson is all she wants to do is grapple, so it's not like Santos had a lot of chances.
But she didn't really shoot on Molly McCann. I mean, she shot on Molly McCann, I think, in the 3rd round, after she'd, that was after she'd like beaten her up on the ground quite significantly in the first two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's not just that. I mean, she can hit takedowns. She doesn't initiate them. Like, she doesn't do things which get her into takedown positions.
She initiated at least one, by my recollection, on Roxy. On Roxanne Modafferi.
I think so.
She backed her off with punches and then ran into a body lock, I think.
Yep.
And like tripped her over a knee. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's tough to know. It's just tough to gauge because, and now if she does just dash forward, if she goes the reckless route and can just create clinches, I mean, Shevchenko will engage in them. But you can't like have a reliable. This is the thing: is like countering in any phase. You can't rely on that against Shevchenko because she's not just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So if she ties up with you, and it turns out that, you can reverse that. Whether she gets you down and then you reverse position on her somehow, or she ties up with you and you end up actually beating her to the takedown and getting on top. She's either going to engage in future clinches in a way that denies you that opportunity. She's going to be keenly aware of it and break when you make the first move to getting to that good position again. Or she's just not going to clinch with you anymore if she can avoid it. And just going to go back to winning a super boring striking battle or letting you, run yourself into counters. Yeah, I mean, it's Valentina. We can guess at the ways in which Taila Santos is going to lose. We can guess at the types of interest she might provide. There's absolutely no reason, as ever, to pick Valentina's opponent in one of these line them up, she may or may not knock them down style title fights.
Yeah, that is a pretty perfect description of them. I mean, as I said, there's elements, I think, of a fighter who could trouble her in there. I still think the Juliana Pena example, that was still a fight of just,
she just ran out.
Prime Juliana Pena was just someone who was just super aggressive.
Yeah.
Super aggressive clinch wrestler who just bum rushed her.
And just took her down. Yeah. People forget that. She just bum rushed her. I think she might have caught a kick.
Yeah.
And just ran her off her feet and got to enjoy some considerable top time over Valentina, who won that fight with a guard submission. Is that correct?
Yeah, she armbarred her, I think.
Yeah, like that right there, it feels like it should be such a glaring flaw for other people to exploit. It's like, here's a pretty not very good fighter who just took her down right away and made her fight from guard for the rest of the fight. Feels like a fighter like Taila Santos should be able to do something with that, but it's actually getting to those positions.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think she has the technical pieces of what Juliana Pena did, and is in many ways actually a better fighter than Juliana Pena.
Yeah.
But she doesn't fight in the same way.
She's not insane enough.
Yeah.
Juliana Pena is crazy. She's crazy enough in exactly the right way for a fighter to go in there after like a 4-year layoff, or like, a 3-year layoff interspersed with one terrible win over Sarah McMahon. Immediately after, didn't she get subbed by Jermaine Durandamy before that? And Jermaine
Durandamy was relatively recent, right?
Yeah. It was that and the Sarah McMahon fight. Those were her last two, right? Before fighting Nunes.
Yeah.
And then she still went into Nunes just like brimming with confidence and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Most fighters aren't like that.
No. And this is also, I mean, even then, she fought Valentina Shevchenko back when Shevchenko was just a scary fighter. She wasn't, the unstoppable Terminator of the division.
True. Although I still think like a woman like Pena would still look at Shevchenko now and be like, perfect.
Yeah.
Everyone else is scared of this woman and I'm not. That's why I'm going to beat her. And who knows? With that kind of mentality, and enough physicality to back it up, that can actually make the difference. Santos maybe she has that in her, but I have yet to see it.
Yeah. Too Diaz-y.
Too Diaz-y. Too much stop and start in her striking. And I think too willing to make aimless mistakes when given a sort of vacuum. Like you give Pena a vacuum, she knows exactly what she's trying to do. I feel like the things Santos most likes to do don't exist in a Shevchenko fight. So.
Yep.
It is obviously Valentina Shevchenko to retain her title and win once again. How many in a row will this be for the demon from Kyrgyzstan? 8. This will be her 9th in a row after that thrilling loss to Amanda Nunes back at UFC 215.
Yep, and 8 of those. Well, and it will be her 7th title defense.
Wow. I will never forgive her for beating Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I will never forgive her. And on that note, let's take a break and talk about Joanna versus Zhang Weili 2 after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
And welcome back to Heavy Hands. It's time for the fight of the card. How could it not be, Phil?
If it's another, I mean, in terms of anticipation, yes, that is for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have right now. I don't know how it plays out yet. You fucking smartass. Very, very excited to see this one run back. First fight. Did we make it our fight of the year for whatever year it was this happened?
Yeah, because there were hipster technical fights which were cooler, but we were like, no, this was horrifying.
Yeah.
We like horror.
This was a harrowing experience, even just sitting in the audience. All right. So what do you make of it, in the interim? I mean, one major thing is, I've somehow been returned to the state of uncertainty regarding Weili Zhang that I was before this fight.
Mm-hmm.
Because she beats Joanna, narrowly in, again, one of the best fights I've ever seen. And then she gets KO'd instantly by Rose, and then sort of fights a smart but uninspired fight in their rematch. And weirdly sort of just drops out of it as it goes along. And I don't know. I just don't feel like it. It's really easy to know who Joanna is, what her limitations are, what her limits are. What do you make of Zhang Weili now? Have you learned anything useful, or are you just as confused as me since her last 2 fights?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was just in some ways it was a bit of a Francis Ngannou overcorrection, right?
Yeah.
And she was just like, well, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen again. I'm going to fight a smart, controlled fight. I had a, disgusting war, and then I got knocked out, and then I need to be technical. Or even Davison Figueiredo.
Yeah.
And I think commonalities of those fighters is that they came out the other side of it because they were young and relatively young for their divisions and stupidly athletic and clearly very talented. So I think there's reason to be cautiously optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
She's apparently incredibly hardworking in the gym. I don't think she's got any, mental hang-ups about approaching the fight game. I think it was just literally one of these cases of just pushing the levers too far in one direction.
That's never happened
also
before.
just the fact that she's just perhaps not as technically deep as she might have wanted.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the interesting things about that Zhang and drzejczyk fight is that most people, I think, were giving it to Zhang after the fight, but I think we were two of the few people that were thought that drzejczyk had actually won.
I gave it to Zhang. This has been one of our politest ever disagreements, where I just I think she just lands the best shots in rounds 4 and 5.
Yeah, but I have seen much more people coming around to the idea that Joanna, that this was actually A, very close, but B, that Joanna might have won it.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's a case. It's an extremely close fight.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
On the other hand, I actually find myself in the opposite, in sort of the opposite camp. I find myself worried about Joanna. Because she's been someone who's been so insanely focused on being the champion for so long. Infamously, terrible weight cuts, and also just in the fight, just being someone with obvious inexhaustible cardio built by just hours in the gym, and just being one of the absolute toughest outs in the sport. Just one of the most mentally unbreakable fighters you will ever encounter. And it's really notable. She's been out since that fight, has she not?
Yeah. Yeah, it's now been over 2 years. 2 years, 3 months today. 2 years and 3 months.
And that is in itself, it's uncharacteristic for any fights, but it's uncharacteristic in particular for Joanna, who was always pretty active.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also just the fact that, if you think of the fact that someone like that is so tense and wound up the entire time, what happens when the pressure finally gets taken off? But also, it was the end of that fight for me. Because in almost all of her other fights, Joanna is still there, brimming with that semi-psychotic confidence that she's got.
Yeah.
And, or she's, convinced that she's beaten Rose, or, and she's afterwards she'd be I'm still the queen, this is still my division, all that kind of stuff. She'd always have her, she would always have, that persona would immediately just jump back up again.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember the end of of their first fight. She just looked kind of sad. Just oh well, that was it. And she had a disgusting, freaky head, and it was the kind of bravado was gone a bit. And that even if she might have won it, I've genuinely found myself thinking what if this is the last time we can see Joanna and drzejczyk kind of doing that kind of making that kind of fight? Because you can't have that many performances like that in your career.
No, you can't. I mean, to be fair, what other fighter has been like that? I mean, we thought the Rose rematch was pretty crazy and back and forth, but I think she was also just exhausted. I just think she and her face probably felt horrible. Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. I don't want to read too much into it because I just don't know. I just think it was an absolutely brutal fight, which is part of what you're saying. Can she recover from that is a question more than worth asking. But I'm not going to read too much into her immediate reaction to this horribly brutal fight. I see no reason. It's not like Zhang looks like she's brimming with confidence either. They both kind of walk away and are like, "Oh my god, it's over."
Yeah, I mean that's just kind of who Zhang is anyway, kind of thing. But I think
true, more reserved.
I don't know. It's always been the swagger.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Was gone. And then she took 2 years off. And, haven't heard as much, admittedly I haven't been paying attention as much, but I haven't heard as much about, of Joanna just being like, this is my division, I'm the queen, everyone bow down, all that kind of crazy stuff. But, but she has had, one of the things about her style is that it has often lent itself to pretty tough fights. She hasn't had wars like that because, no one has wars like that with any regularity apart from Justin Gaethje and maybe and Dustin Poirier and a couple of other fighters. But, her first 2 fights against Claudia Gadelha, super tough. Even the Jessica Andrade fight, she doesn't have her style means that her fights are inherently tough and wearing. What about even her fight against big girl, what's her name?
Letourneau? The Letourneau fight was pretty scrappy.
Yeah, Letourneau.
Mm-hmm.
Just a tough fight.
Yeah.
She doesn't have Shevchenko-esque clinical shutouts.
I do disagree about the Andrade one. I think that's the closest to a clinical shutout that she's ever had, probably.
Yeah, she's had slaughters, against...
Poor Carla.
Yeah. Carla Esparza.
Oh, even that one is actually kind of a battle. She's really fighting off takedowns for the most of that fight and then just sort of eats Carla alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. She's had plenty of scraps.
Jessica Penne as well.
Penne, yes. Yeah, all I'm saying is that I'm not going to read too much into either the layoff or because while she's had many, many scraps, that was not a scrap. That was a genuine war. That was a McDonald Lawler 2 level. I'm not the same after that kind of fight, which again is part of the point you're making. But the point is I don't know. I don't know where she is. I haven't seen how she responds to that. I suppose it's very much a credit to Zhang Weili that she kind of seems to have gotten past it fine. There was reason to doubt that after the knockout loss to Rose. You're like, maybe it ruined her. She didn't look ruined. I think you're probably right that she was just overcorrecting the fact that has literally never happened before. Oh, I've never just been KO'd in a minute flat. I have to approach this rematch differently. And it was, I think, her fighting a bit against type. It was her, trying to be overly cautious. And I think taking herself out of the sort of, I think in a way she's probably more comfortable in that kind of mental space she shared with Joanna. Where it's the opponent is trying to take it from you and you have to fight back, you have to claw back, and her not wanting to put herself into that kind of fight, I think made it look like she was kind of half asleep half the time.
Yep.
'Cause she probably just wasn't enjoying herself the way she's used to enjoying herself, wasn't just full of life and survival instinct the way she often is, even in fights where she's doing much, much better and more clearly winning than she was in the Joanna fight. So yeah, I suppose there's plenty of reason to doubt both of these women. Weili Zhang has showed something different and not necessarily looked amazing, while still making, I think, some very good decisions. And Joanna has been uncharacteristically quiet and absent, from the sport and the public eye since.
Yep.
What shook out in the first fight, though? These are X factors. We usually take the tack of just saying we have to assume that we're looking at the same fight unless there's do you feel you have strong reason to suspect that Joanna's going to come into this diminished?
No, I don't really have strong reasons to say that. It's one of those things you can't say until you see it.
Right. You won't be surprised if it happens, but
yeah.
But as for now, it's still a total unknown.
Yep.
So then let's talk about what happened in the first fight, what made it such a close, amazing fight, and what might be expanded on here, given that this is, very importantly, a 3-rounder instead of the 5-round war they had last time.
So I think it really comes down to the fact that drzejczyk is still, I think, the superior range striker.
Yeah.
She is just the straighter puncher. She has the better footwork. But I think Zhang is just built to counter two of her safety valves. The one is that drzejczyk, after throwing, likes to flurry in the pocket to back people off.
Mm-hmm.
And Zhang would simply grit down and throw with her as the bigger puncher, and wouldn't always come out of the exchange winning it, but simply was the bigger hitter, so it didn't, she didn't have to win all or even half the exchanges.
Yeah. She could just
and also
afford
the fact that Zhang is able to counter. She is a good counterer of kicks.
Yes.
Meaning that, so this sort of meant that Joanna couldn't safely peck away at any point. She was either getting pulled into pocket exchanges, or she was getting her kicks countered when she tried to fight from the outside.
Yeah. Now, I think she could have. I think there were different ways. I mean, I think there was a clear adjustment period. Basically like last minute of the first round and through round 2, where Joanna was just thinking, oh, this is at the range where I just poke at people with kicks, and she just kept getting punished for it. And she had to figure out that she was going to have to disguise the kick. She was going to have to lead with other strikes, lead with her hands to set those up, or get Zhang moving to land kicks safely. She did find a way around it. I mean, her jab was super effective. As was the southpaw switch to get her shots in. And I think leading more with her hands and leading with her feints. These were all really, really effective, especially once she kind of figured out that Zhang was just keying into counter, that was like her primary engagement with these exchanges, was waiting for Joanna to commit enough, whether it was a single kick or to a flurry, that she could then counter, often with a right hand and a left hook. That Joanna was able to draw her counters out with feints and then re-counter her. It may have been the best counter-punching performance I've ever seen from Joanna. Because normally she's not very good at counter-punching. This was more of an aggressive counter-punching thing, I think, that suited her much better, where she could come in with a jab and then fire a 1-2 that would counter the big right hand that would just immediately trigger out of Zhang. So yeah, I think there are ways, if she comes into this having been pre-adjusted, to not just get countered on kicks. And if that doesn't happen, I don't know. I mean, I feel like that could just be pretty good for Joanna. Like it took a long time after she adjusted to the kick counters. It took quite a while really for Zhang to actually figure out how to get back in, and her solution was pretty much just to throw herself into exchanges. Like it was just to make things increasingly more violent as the fight went on. And that's why I kind of wonder, is Zhang still willing to do that? Granted, this is the opponent it worked against the first time, but is she still willing to just create horrific, messy exchanges in order to get her way into a fight with Joanna? Is she not going to have a choice? I mean, is Joanna just going to bring it out of her? That probably is what's going to happen. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question in both. Again, like in both directions, right? Because I think a lot of what got Joanna in trouble in the first fight was following in behind her own offense, right?
Yeah.
Is that her coming in on Weili and trying to build on her own offense, and instead just getting like pushed back out of the pocket with counters. Again, if Joanna actually comes in like more cautious, deciding I don't want to be in wars again, does that work better or worse for her? Because, was Zhang really able to lead that successfully against Joanna when Joanna wasn't coming in against her? What if Joanna pokes her a few times and then it's just like, I'm in the lead, you attack now.
Yeah, I mean, she wasn't really. Yeah, I mean, it was such a weird fight because Zhang was kind of losing on both sides of the coin. Like when Joanna was clearly at the right distance, and was aware of the triggers and was trying to pull them in order to punish Zhang for firing back, she was winning. So when she was really in control and pressuring, she was winning. And then when she was actually just sort of staying safe, again, the only time Zhang was hitting her was when she just sort of agreed to exchange.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think if she fights a more cautious fight where she takes her wins and just banks them.
Yeah.
I think that's one of her more reliable ways to victory.
I totally agree. Just treat Zhang like she's Andrade. Be like, I don't want to mix up with her in the pocket. I don't want to get grabbed by her. Just move around and stick her with single jabs. Mm-hmm. And she might have to adjust that a bit and think, okay, fewer of the kicks than I would normally want to throw against this kind of opponent. Because Zhang is particularly good. It's super fast. She really triggers on kicks to counter them. And will cover distance with lightning speed. And it doesn't mind overcommitting to just bomb into you with a right hand on the kick. So maybe you pull some of those back, you jab, you feint. I think that's probably a pretty good approach to this fight for Joanna. I really think that could work. Because I think something you said very early in this segment is true, is that there is not a ton of technical depth to Weili Zhang. She's got enough, and she will continually show new things. I mean, one of the major things I recall saying about this fight when we broke it down beforehand was that Zhang didn't have a left hook. She did in this fight.
But then she showed a tremendous left hook in this fight.
She did in this fight. It still wasn't perfectly thrown a lot of the time. I mean, there's one exchange in particular I can remember. It might be in the 4th round where this is Joanna fighting off the back foot. And yeah, Zhang is coming in with a right hand, and she does this really awkward piece of footwork. Like, she's just not paying attention to her feet as she tries to follow up with the left hook, and just eats a huge counter right. And it actually hurts her. One of the few times in that fight where Zhang was visibly hurt by one of Joanna's punches. Yeah, all the finer details of her, all the mechanics of her strikes aren't really that great. So if you put her into a fight where it's how are you going to set everything up? How are you going to make me get into these exchanges? How are you going to make that power and speed advantage a factor if I just don't give you opportunities to do it? Then I think Joanna can win that fight. So
it's a really interesting one, just from the strange perspective that they both might come in with the same ideas.
True.
It was an insane war, that they both might come in with the plan that I can fight this, because.
But what's Zhang's version of that plan?
I mean, Zhang's version can simply be that the more is that drzejczyk's success came from volume and mine came from single shots. So I just need to find a way to land, the big right body kick and the big left hand. And get stuck in volume-based exchanges less. I don't think it would be a good plan. It would be one which would jive with what we saw in the Namajunas fight.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, we might get a much more cautious fight. I think if we do, I think it will probably deteriorate into violence anyway. I don't think these two are really capable of actually having a boring fight, I've got to be honest.
No, I think the only way Joanna maintained the level of discipline she did against Andrade was that Andrade was just relentlessly walking into her target, into her her crosshairs.
Yeah, I think she was happy with the amount of punching and kicking she was getting done, frankly.
Given an opponent more like Letourneau, granted much different build and everything, but an opponent who is actually kind of content to stay at kicking range, as you said, still a pretty damn scrappy fight with a lot of strikes thrown. Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. I still think that kind of fight favors Joanna. And so I am going to pick her.
Yeah, I'm really tempted to. I think it's one of the ones where, as I said, I do think she won that fight the last time, and I think that I find myself thinking that Zhang's success is less replicable.
Yeah.
No, it was.
I think it's a relatively simple adjustment for Joanna to make, basically, to not just get into the exact same war.
Yep. And as we said before, Zhang she's kind of young, but she's not that young. She's 32. She's only 2 years younger than Joanna.
Yeah.
Just has less miles on the clock. I don't know. I really want to pick Joanna. Do I really want to pick her off a 2-year layoff?
Yeah.
I guess you know what? I've been picking picking the other side just for the sake of balance. I think I'm going to side with you on picking Joanna as well.
All right.
What the hell? Let's go down together when she comes out and she looks absolutely gun shy. And just gets knocked out.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed it's a good weight cut, because that does seem to make a big difference for her.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, and the other thing, she does seem like a better rematch fighter than Zhang. Now that we've seen Zhang have a rematch, it wasn't great.
Yeah.
And Joanna has improved on every rematch that we've seen her have, pretty much.
That's true, actually. Even as heartbreaking as it was, she still had plenty of good moments in that fight with Valentina. Yeah, that's true.
Yep. Rose 2 was much better than Rose 1.
Was Gadelia 2 better than Gadelia 1? I think it arguably was.
Yes, it was.
Gadelia 1 hinged on one moment, almost.
Yeah. Yeah, it was one knockdown.
Yeah, really. Without that, she probably would have lost. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Joanna for the rematch powers. And that does it for our main episode breakdown of UFC 275. We got all the emotional points here. We got potential for heartbreak, thrilling excitement, comeback stories, naps. We really are going to hit every single thing that you want out of a fight night. And there's a lot more to it as well. We may get to discuss some of this in a bonus episode. I think we might try and do a real quick run through after this. But what do we have to look forward to next week? Oh, complicated feelings for Phil. June 18th, Cater versus Emmett. It's actually probably very simple feelings for you. I assume you want Cater to win. No? Oh, he's gone on.
I'm sorry.
He's gone on mute.
You know what? I'm okay with Josh Emmett now.
Oh, that's right. You've forgiven him.
Yeah, I've forgiven him. All the hatred has been transferred to Giga Chikadze.
Okay, that's good. That's good. We can agree on that.
I mean, he's able to accept and joke about his own freaky looks, and he's just had a tough road. So
his reaction to the Falmer,
you can win now.
His reaction to the Falmer line when he was told that people said he looked like, or no, sorry, this was Bobby Knuckles. Somebody told him that people thought Josh Emmett looked like a Falmer.
Yeah,
and Bobby Knuckles liked that.
Yeah, he found it very funny.
He was tickled by that. Yeah, okay looking card here, to be honest. Better than the last Fight Night card, certainly. So we're going to talk to you guys about that next week. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.